For a look at the state of the state, please welcome Ana Yáñez-Correa, the Director of Community Engagement, Harris County Precinct 1, and Marc Levin, the Vice President of Criminal Justice Policy at the Texas Public Policy Foundation and Right on Crime. Leading the conversation is Atlantic contributing editor Alison Stewart.
So thanks everybody for being here, and Marc is being really great by being here because he's got to catch a flight, so if he just disappears, that's why. Okay. In researching this, you can get flooded with statistics. They become overwhelming. It kind of takes over the conversation. But there was one that I saw I thought was really interesting and pertained to this conversation, and that's that federal prisons hold 1 in 8 imprisoned Americans, so that mass incarceration really is a state issue. And these two have worked together, even though they come at the issue from different sides. They wrote an article together called Correcting the Texas Justice System. It was for the Fort Worth Star, and it went viral. Name of your company, name of your organization is Right on Crime. Yep. You are a conservative. This is your issue. So in 2007, there seemed to be some bipartisanship around this issue. Before that, one of your colleagues said, quote, "No one in conservative think tanks worked on criminal justice other than to advocate for more prisons and more incarceration." First of all, why was that the case? And then why did it shift around 2007?
Well, it goes back to, I think, the Willie Horton scandal, and criminal justice became a third rail in American politics, and no one wanted to be seen as soft on crime. Now, kind of like Nixon went to China, conservative politicians are, I think, less susceptible to those attacks, so they're in a unique position to be able to lead. Of course, not all of them really wanted to lead, but in 2007, we hit a crossroads. Unlike the federal government, states have to balance the budget, and we were facing building 17,000 more prison beds, and we couldn't staff the ones we had. So Ana and I, working with legislative leaders, we were able to help draft a plan where we instead, now we've closed 8 prisons, we've put in a lot more treatment, and we got a lot more work to do, though. You know, Texas is now, instead of 3rd, we're 6th in terms of our incarceration rate, but it's still unacceptably high. But I think that what's changed is, you know, if you believe in limited government, you believe in redemption, you have to apply those principles that you say you believe in other areas to criminal justice as well. And we've been able to get many conservatives to recognize that.
Did you go at the fiscal argument first?
I think we always say that saving money is the appetizer that brings policymakers to the table, but the main course is keeping families together, more public safety, getting people jobs instead of being incarcerated, and obviously the idea of it's part of every major religious tradition that people can change and find a new path in life, whether that's through spiritual change or otherwise. So, but I do think the fiscal issue is what brings folks to the table.
Conservative folks to the table. I know. There's this place where this diverse group, there's a Venn diagram where you have religious folks, like Marc mentioned, liberal folks, conservative folks, where they cross over, and criminal justice reform is one of those places where they have agreement on the issue. What is it going to take to keep that Venn diagram in place so that this just isn't a moment? Right now, criminal justice reform is having its moment. How do we keep those folks at the table working together?
I mean, I'm looking at it right now, right? It's going to take the public. It's going to take the public to continue to fight for what is right, the public to continue to demand for reforms that are not just a little bit of reform here, a little bit of reform there, but transformative reforms. And honestly, the public is way ahead of the politician. The youth organizing that is going on around in this country is inspiring. The mamas and daddies whose children are in the system fighting for reform is amazing, right? Like, the public has always realized, communities of color have always realized the purpose of the criminal justice system. And it was not for public safety purposes. It was to disenfranchise, it was to undermine, it was to devastate communities. And now with social media, with activism, with mobilization, with movement building, it's not stopping. It is not stopping. People have woken up, and that's going to continue. And fiscal conservatives understand they're not getting their bang for the return. They're not getting the public safety outcomes in the name of public safety based on failed criminal justice policies, and also real, the coalitions that right and left have built started with the intent of for our various reasons, started with the intent of let's reduce cost and increase public safety, but friendships have developed throughout the years that are not going to go away. I was able to work in my previous job in 9 different states, and they're difficult states to work, like Arizona, in Louisiana, in Georgia, in Michigan, and the trajectory of a real, genuine coalition continues. Not without its challenges, but it continues. So it's not, this isn't a moment. This is gonna continue to happen.
When we talk about the fiscal argument, you know it, Marc, there are many towns that their entire economy is based around prisons. How do you talk to those folks, those conservative folks who say, like, you know what, no, prisons need to stay in our towns. This means jobs. This is our economy. This is our livelihood.
Well, I mean, I think that's, from a conservative philosophical standpoint, it's a very simple thing, that it's not the role of government to create jobs, it's the role of the private sector. We shouldn't have one more prison than we need simply as a source of jobs. Now, but I do realize, obviously, in rural areas where you have a prison town, that has been an obstacle in some places, not so much in Texas. I think, for one thing, in Texas, there's a turnover of over 5,000 prison guards every year. So usually they can be, unfortunately, we still have over 100 prisons, they can be put into a nearby prison, and so it's not like they have to lose their job. You know, Anna's absolutely right about the coalition. So there's the Smart on Crime Texas Coalition, and we've got, you know, Texas Association for Business, Texas Criminal Justice Coalition, which Anna started and did amazing work at. Goodwill, no one can object to Goodwill. The ACLU, some people object to the ACLU, but us as the conservatives, Prison Fellowship, we're going to have a huge, Texas Association of Business, the biggest state business group. So it's a powerful coalition, and we just released our legislative agenda, which includes bail reform, drug sentencing reform, a lot of other things we can talk about.
Philosophically, Anna, how do you feel about the fact that, you know, there are organizations like the Koch brothers, big money coming in from outside to support, they happen to support criminal justice reform. They probably don't support other things that you agree with, things about climate change. What do you think about that kind of big money coming from outside the state to support an issue, even if you believe in it, while you might not believe in other things?
The failures of the criminal justice system has touched everybody, white, brown, rich, not rich, and a lot of the people that have joined forces, they are starting to realize the devastating effects of what we have done to communities. Many of the people that are Republican, conservative, themselves are starting to experience the impact. And so I say, come on down. Let's work together with the understanding that we will agree to disagree on the things, and we will fight you tooth and nail to make sure that there's justice on all issues, but with an understanding that we have to open the doors. And our office is one that if you want to do right by the people, if you want to create justice, we're going to work with you. And they know that we're going to fight you on other issues, right?
Where do you guys disagree? Where do you on this issue? Where do you disagree?
Listen, back in the day, I remember that you know, we started working in 2005, and I remember Marc Levin, you know, coming up and it's like, hey, I have this proposal. It's going to save a lot of money. And I was like, okay, buddy, what is it? What is it? And it was a proposal that did not make legislation. It didn't go. It was just one of those like discussions. And it was, you know, we have the state jail system. Let's privatize it. And I remember being like, oh, I have been waiting for this moment. I'm going to roll up my sleeves, and because we have been aligned in so many different issues. And on the privatization of services and privatization of prisons, we just it just was not going anywhere, and the proposal, it didn't happen, and what was really nice about it is that a couple of years after, when the private prisons presented a letter to all the governors saying, if you keep your capacity in prisons by 90%, we will run your facilities. Without me saying anything, he wrote this letter to Governor Perry at the time saying, no, this is unsustainable, this is not going to work. So I say this as an example because we may start ideologically on things that we don't agree on, but through collaboration, through coalition, through having hard discussions, you start building that momentum so that people can see eye to eye.
Yeah, and a lot of the 8 prisons we've closed in Texas have been private prisons. And the nice thing about the contracts in Texas is they can terminate them at any time. Absolutely, these occupancy guarantees that some other states like Arizona have are terrible. I mean, Marriott would like an occupancy guarantee from the government, but what could be a worse idea than the government guaranteeing profits for a private company?
That's right.
Marc, a Texas Defender Service reporter told a reporter, if you change something in Harris County, if you reform it, you actually have the capacity to affect the rest of the state of Texas. And in fact, given our visibility, you have the capacity to impact justice systems around the country. First of all, do you agree with that? And what do you think that's been done here, reforms here, that have had a major impact?
Well, the number one thing, which Kim may have talked about, is diverting people, pre-trial diversion for less than a gram. A few thousand fewer people are now being sent to state jail from Harris County than previously. And the reason is these folks were choosing, it's counterintuitive, but they were choosing state jail over probation. But by offering a pre-trial diversion where there's the incentive of no adjudication, no conviction, you go through a treatment program, these individuals are now choosing. And the bail part is a critical part, offering the pretrial diversion immediately so someone doesn't languish in jail because they can't afford bail, and they're getting 2 or 3 for 1. So by the time they would end up being adjudicated, they have all this credit, so there's virtually no time left in state jail versus up to 5 years of probation. So what we're going to be doing at the state level next session is trying to make this a statewide presumption of pretrial diversion on your first less than a gram of drug possession. And then the bail reform, obviously, which is stemmed from the lawsuit. I hope very much that we will be able to pass a statewide bail reform measure, which includes things like presumptive non-financial release for low-risk defendants. I think that it's quite clear that counties across the state are wasting money keeping people in jail simply because they can't afford bail. And we've really got to, what we have to do is make sure that the in-out decision is totally separated from any financial conditions, because it should be based entirely on public safety and risk of flight. Considering someone's ability to pay is completely contrary to due process, the Equal Protection Clause, and who we are as a country.
What's something that could change in Harris County that you think could have an impact statewide and potentially nationally?
When you look at who represents, how many members of the legislature come from Harris County? I mean, that is a very powerful voting bloc. And not if the criminal justice system can be transformed, when the criminal justice system is transformed in Harris County, that's going to send a signal to all of the 254 counties that, okay, we need to get going. And nationwide, in all of the travels that we've done, people look at Texas. People see Texas as a critical player of reform. In a lot of the states that we've done work in, people don't ask us, no offense to those states, what is California doing? Although California is doing, for example, incredible work, they ask, what is Texas doing? So we have an opportunity to change not only the culture, but to change the narrative, to provide a vision for the community that will heal the community, that will address the trauma that people of color have been facing. And it's no stopping. You have leadership. You have our office who is like wide open to coordinate and to work with people who really want to see reform. It's unstoppable. The reforms that have taken place in Harris County have been great, but we still have a long way to go. And since we're talking about race and justice, race and ethnicity, data collection need to be discussed throughout every single state of the decision-making process.
Marc, I was going to ask you, what is Right on Center doing about racial disparities in the criminal justice?
That's a great question. It does start with data. Florida passed a great data bill this year, which we supported. They didn't pass that much else, unfortunately, but they're behind Texas otherwise. But it's a great data collection bill. I mean, I guess it was a year or two ago, it came out, DPS was just classifying Hispanic drivers, people pulled over, as white. So, I mean, it tells you how behind the times some of these systems are. I think that for us, the challenge is that, obviously policing police tend to spend the most time in areas where there's high crime rates, and particularly property and violent crime, and that's sensible. But one of the byproducts of that is we know all races use drugs in the same levels, but African Americans are much more likely to be arrested for marijuana and other drug possession. So if we don't have some way of addressing that later in the system, we're going to have unfair outcomes. And one of the other issues is with regard to risk assessment, which we strongly support using that instead of money in terms of looking at who's released from jail. But I think that you can adjust for these racial issues, for example, by excluding drug possession convictions from those risk assessment scores, because we know that that is, whether someone has a drug possession record is going to depend in large measure on where they happen to live, how they got their drugs. Wealthier people get them more surreptitiously. So there's ways we can make adjustments without any detriment to public safety. I would argue even strengthening the emphasis on the factors that actually correlate to risk of harming another person, not a risk that someone's going to smoke pot again.
Let's get some microphones out. I have one more question. You keep saying the word we're support, we're behind it. What does that actually mean? What does that mean you actually do?
Well, we like to say we're not just a think tank, but a do tank. So we testify, we help draft legislation, we meet with legislators and legislative staff.
You twist arms? Nicely?
Well, I mean, I think that our hope is that politicians will do the right thing, but there's other folks out there that can help them feel the heat so they see the light. But we don't get involved in campaigns and that sort of thing. We're C3.
We have questions from the audience. At all. I can keep going.
Alison?
No, right here. I'm sorry.
Ann Gorman from Angela House. In the spirit of bringing about change, what is Houston or Texas or any other significant cities of size in the United States, have they taken a hard look at the models in Europe, their criminal justice systems, where they have lower rates of incarceration and just less violence overall in their communities?
And that's what I'm talking about. We need to redefine what success looks like. Because for the communities that we serve, success is not one less revocation. Success is not one less arrest. Success is making sure that they have the needs that they need to thrive, as all of the panelists have said. And if other countries can do it, if other communities who are wealthy, who are not people of color, can benefit from resources, we can. There's over 70 million people with criminal records. We are preventing people from thriving. We are destroying their society. We are putting the value of an individual based on, oh, you're a felon, oh, you're a misdemeanor. You know, you are not looking at individuals as individuals holistically. So what we're talking about is, what do we want? Okay, you know, we can talk all day long. We don't want this, we don't want this, we don't want this. So what is it that we do want? And so that's what we need to do. We need to take responsibility. We need to join forces. We need to work together with likely, unlikely allies. And we need to demand for a vision so that we can support the men and women who have been elected, who want to go there. And we need to give them the resources. We need to push them.
Well, let me just say, I went on a tour of prisons in Germany, and it was a real revelation. Of course, they have 1/10 the incarceration rate of the U.S. They also, by the way, many youths up until 24, or young adults really, they're in the juvenile facilities. And of course, we still need to raise the age in Texas. We're one of the few states left where 17-year-olds are automatically getting adult criminal records and going to adult jails, many of which results in abuse and physical, sexual, and otherwise. So I hope we'll be able to do that next session. But the other thing about the prisons in Germany is I was really struck by how many choices every person in prison made every day. They picked ingredients for the meal. They decided what books to check out at the library. Instead of turning out people that had no ability to make decisions, I was at the Prison Entrepreneurship Program, great program here in Houston. They take folks coming out of prison out to dinner, their first meal, and they would just stare at the menu for many minutes because they haven't had to make a choice in years. And we talk about the belief in individual liberty and personal autonomy, and we're not running our prisons in a way that is consistent with that.
And why does the person have to be arrested to be able to get those resources to begin with, okay? We don't need to use the criminal justice system the way that it has so that people's needs can be met.
I have to ask you one more question before you take off your mic. What doesn't Jeff Sessions understand?
It's probably a good thing I took off the mic, but we're hoping to pass something despite his views at federal prison
What's
reform.
one thing that Jeff Sessions does not understand, truly?
Well, I
About
don't think
this-
I
about this
understand the
issue.
academic research that longer prison terms don't reduce recidivism. How about that?
Okay, let's thank our panel.
Yeah, thank you.